Christian Thielemann directed the Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra.
I understand that item number 2, was that withdrawn?
Yes, item number 2 has been withdrawn. I did want to, just for the benefit of the commission, John, if you could put the graphic up. Not this is just for your benefit of the history of, since we have been reviewing these, just to give you an idea, and this can be a followed up report at some place. But the predominant concern that we had about the application was not about vendors in the grass, but the concept that grassy areas could be used for customer parking. That is a place that hasn't been gone to before, and it was the basis in 2005 for a denial. And so this particular one was denied. This one on which was just off of North Ohio was withdrawn because the North Ohio Overlay District does not allow flea markets. So all the ones that have been approved historically exist no more, but in each case, except for the one at 1056 East Pacific, parking was somewhat a concern and at a premium. And so this just gives you an idea of how many vendors were talked about. In only one case, this one here, where they're actually the number of vendors that were requested or anticipated. And even in this case, it was rarely 20. But the Planning Commission had at least 4 hearings on that, and that was virtually a full-time job for city staff monitoring the parking on grass and things of that nature. So we did meet with Bessie Rhodes following the meeting and asked her to develop her own plan, which we would insert in the packet. And the reason it stayed on your agenda is because we were under the belief that she was coming back with an enhanced plan, and instead came back with a letter of withdrawal. So that is what we have, and we would have no action taken on that item. It is considered closed out at this point.
Did any of those prior applications have in their permit process a sunset clause or an item to review it, or did they just go until they stopped?
In the case of this one, which Mr. Mikesell would probably remember well, and then this one here, the way that was handled was similar to the way that the Stutzman's was handled. Was we'll approve it, the Planning Commission approve it on a trial basis for a year, and we'll conduct a hearing on it the following year to see how it went or to see if we need to adjust anything. So as opposed to a sunset clause per se, these were both granted for a calendar year and then came back to the Planning Commission for renewal. In where we're at with Stutzman's now is that I think the first 3 years they were there, they were reviewed by the Planning Commission to see how it was working, and then after that they just renew it each year administratively.
Can you give us just a little bit of an overview, Dean? Nothing at length, but just a little bit of an overview of what you do as a staff to review one of those?
Yes. If it is the establishment for the first time of an open-air market or flea market, then we sit down, we meet with them, we figure out if it's a lease situation or an ownership situation. The most important thing is to see who's going to be the operator of that, and then we try to develop a plan, and we look at available parking, we look at making sure the applicant understands where the right-of-way is and what's private property, and then we try to work up a plan for placement of the vendor stalls, parking, how you're going to handle restrooms, how you're going to handle trash disposal, those kind of things. It's very similar to what we have been doing the past 2 years with consumer fireworks stands. We sit down with the potential operator. We look at the piece of property they want to work with. We'll see if it can be made to fit. We'll look at the square footage of the tent. We'll look at where parking's going to be, where trash disposal is going to be handled. Are they going to have access to a building for restrooms or put in porta potties? And we try to go through all those things. The reason that flea markets, in particular, and the open-air markets are now done through a public hearing process is what was happening is on a flea market, if we approve that administratively, the neighbors often had complaints about it or said, we didn't know this was happening. Sure. And so the idea is to have the public hearing up front, let the neighbors know about it up front, speak now or hold your peace approach. And if they have concerns about trespassing or trash collection or whatever, they can bring those up at the hearing.
At the administrative review, a year later, or whatever the frequency happens to be, are the neighbors notified then as well?
If there is in the case of these two items that were approved at a public hearing, there was a public hearing scheduled the following year so that if neighbors were dissatisfied with that, they could come back. But that's a judgment call for you all if we get to that point. So if you approve it initially, you can decide whether you want to delegate us the authority to renew it, or if you say, you know what, we want to hear from the neighbors and see how this worked before it goes another year. It's happened both ways, and it's just a judgment call for you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any more on that subject? We'll move on to item number 3, application Z94-2A, filed by Walters Realty, requesting a zoning classification change. Staff?
Just as a matter of history, this property was historically zoned C3 since 1977, and at 1994, when Waters True Value proposed constructing a new store at this location, it was vacant. And the way that was addressed at the time, it was a little bit unusual. What we have at other locations around that are zone C3, like Walmart or Kmart or places like that, is at a seasonal selling time. They can move outdoors and have an outdoor garden supply area, but it can't exceed 15% of the floor area of the store. Well, what was unusual about this was that the outdoor display area was over 100% the size of the store. But, John, if you could go to the zoning map for the area, please. The issue at the time and the issue that remains to agree today is that if you look at this map and you search for C5 zoning or an alternate zoning, you're not going to find it. All you see on this map is C3 zoning or C1 zoning in the case of the commercial properties. So here is the Wells Insurance Agency right here, some doctor's offices here, and then you have Central National Bank and the funeral home, and then this is Waters True Value. This is the front part of the Westar offices, which is zone C3, and then there's a planned development district done for their yard, and then on this block here it's C3, and it's C3 going down Ohio. So rather than attempting to do a C5 zoning, which didn't really fit with the surrounding area, the original Waters True Value and Earth Care was done as a planned C3 district. And so everything about the Waters True Value original project fit within C3 except their outdoor sales area for the garden area, instead of being limited to 15% of the enclosed floor area, was approved to be 117% the size of the indoor floor area. So that that plan was approved in June of 1994, subject to a number of conditions, and the ordinance was passed by the City Commission in July 1994. The store was completed and opened in December of 1995, which brings us to the present situation. And if you're a customer over there, you'll know that the store has undergone a renovation over there on the inside, and as part of that, they've changed their business model and are attempting to move more into equipment rental, and equipment that you don't just walk into the store and rent, but larger pieces of equipment for rental purposes. And so what was proposed was, at least to staff, was establishing a fenced-in area along the north side of the store building. And what we did was sat down and looked at that, met with Mr. Hayworth and Mr. Waters, and I think I'd just refer each of you to page 3 of your staff report. And this is what we walked down through, and if the question is, well, how come that's something that staff couldn't just approve administratively? And the reasons are, one, it is, even though this functions as a secondary front yard or side yard, it is, this area right here is within the front yard setback area, so it is front yard storage. So it extends into the 25-foot setback area. It would displace a area that, when the Planning Commission approved it in 1994, was a landscaped buffer between the building and Greeley Avenue, shown like that. It was in the conditions of approval. The conditions of approval allowed an outdoor display yard for garden center and plant materials and things of that nature, but specifically disallowed the storage of machinery or equipment. In the approval action, the outdoor display area was allowed to be 117% of the area of the store, and this would increase it to 132% of the area of the store. And then finally, and most importantly, equipment rental businesses such as the one that closed on South Broadway are first allowed in the C5 zoning district. So for those reasons, this was not something that we could approve administratively as a change by staff. So the application that is before you is requesting that the zoning classification be changed from a planned C3 shopping center to a planned C5 service commercial. That would allow equipment sales and rental to be added as a permitted use. And then the other change would be amending the site plan that was approved in 1994 to allow what was previously a front yard landscaped area along Greeley to be removed and replaced by an outdoor equipment storage and display area. And so what we asked, and can be explained better by the applicants today, is that it would be helpful to staff and the Planning Commission to get an idea of what that would look like appearance-wise, and if landscaping was removed, is there any landscaping or screening proposed? Because what is across the street is you've got an insurance office, but you also have a housing area here, and any other business abutting a residential area would require some form of screening or fencing between the outdoor display to screen it from residential use and also from Greeley Avenue. And so we do have Mr. Stack here. I want to pause here just to give you an update from Mr. Stack about Greeley Avenue, because one of the things that has obviously dramatically changed is with the closure of the bridge, the amount of traffic driving by on Greeley in this location is greatly reduced, because the only traffic would be, most of the traffic is what's coming out of their lot and going back this way, but in terms of traffic along here, it's greatly reduced from what it once was. But Dan, could you give the commission an update on the status of the bridge and future status?
Yes. The commission met last year in about the April to May timeframe and discussed the options for the Greeley Bridge. Many options exist there as far as, do we put in a new bridge? Do we try to put in a pedestrian bridge, a big bridge, a small bridge, a possible river bridge, or a box culvert? There's just a lot of options for the river. Channel has many different options as far as what works. And at the time that the commission met and discussed that, we looked at all the entrances to the park, basically to Oakdale and Oakdale, Kenwood, Bicentennial Center area, and there's currently 5 entrances, and without Greeley there'd be 4. So it wasn't a huge reason by the commission to say we need to spend $500,000 on a new bridge at this time, based on other options that we have to access the Kenwood and Oakdale Park area as well as the Bicentennial Center. With the Bicentennial Center improvements being approved as well, they really want to make Midway the entrance. That's what they want the entrance to be to the Bicentennial Center. A nice grand entrance, a nice road, a nice marquee sign. Everybody in Ohio would see that area as the way to get into the Bicentennial Center. So at the time that the commission was deciding on that, they felt like Greeley did not need to have a $500,000 new bridge there at this time. It could always change, and that as the area grows or changes, it still could change. At this time, they just want a pedestrian bridge there, and that's a $30,000 to $50,000 capital improvement, not a huge deal. The bridge could be relocated at some future date as a pedestrian bridge. Those are always easy to. You can kind of pick them up and move them around if you have to, so that wouldn't be a major loss to the city or the taxpayer dollars if at some point in the future that becomes a vehicular bridge again. I was going to look and see how many cars Greeley takes. Dean, do you guys have that here?
No, we didn't have any numbers from the pre-bridge closure, but part of the rationale of why Greeley is signalized was that it is exactly halfway between Iron and Ohio, and it was as much about creating gaps in traffic on Ohio for people to get out and into Ohio as it was not about traffic volumes on Greeley. So
that's correct.
The purpose is to create stopping point on Ohio where you could have gaps and allow people to get out of the other streets that aren't signalized as well, not because Greeley is so heavily traveled.
Yeah, trying to move the traffic signal to Midway would be a pretty large challenge, and when we have looked at that intersection, it currently works pretty well, even in a big event. The Alan Jackson concert recently was one that we thought, well, that's going to test it and see if it really works, and that was not anything we heard had any major concerns with, and the Bicentennial Center managers seemed to think it worked okay. So that, even for a big event, Midway and all the other entrances seem to be able to handle that. So this traffic signal would probably continue to stay at Greeley for a long time, based on exactly what Dean just said, is that it creates gaps for traffic, especially for True Value and the bank, and then mostly for the east side. The east side traffic, the whole entire neighborhood accesses Ohio via the Greeley Avenue light or traffic signal, because it's a little harder to get out on Ohio in rush hour without having a signal to go to, and their only option is to either go to Iron. You cannot get to Crawford from that area. You'd have to cross the river, and you can't do that. So you can only go to Iron or Greeley, and Greeley serves a major purpose for mostly the eastern half of that quarter section or the subdivision for all the residents in that area. You can try to get out on some of the others, Westchester and Stack are a few of the others that you can maybe get out in at a certain time, but the traffic signal is the mode that people have to use when it's busy.
And part of the reason we bring that up is that while the Greeley location is technically a front yard for zoning purposes with the closure of Greeley, it reinforces that as a secondary front yard in terms of street exposure and all of that. So we've highlighted for you on page 4 and 5 the differences between C3 and C5, and they're not major, but the primary difference between C3 and C5 is the ability to have outdoor display and storage. But what we're talking about here doesn't implicate heights or setbacks or lot coverages or parking or any of those things. It is primarily about whether the area north of the building should be preserved as a landscape area or it can and should be converted to a fenced-in equipment storage and display area. So the applicant believes that the C3 use limitations that don't allow that to be used for outdoor storage and display inhibits his ability to modify and expand his retail business operation at this location and has therefore requested the change. And so what you should think about is whether if the outdoor storage area is approved, whether that area along Greeley that you're seeing there is the only feasible area on the site for the outdoor display and storage area, or whether there are alternative locations that wouldn't involve a front yard. We showed you the map, and you can see on the map that there's no C5 zoning anywhere in the vicinity. You would have C3 zoning even over on the fairgrounds and to the south. The one exception to the zoning pattern is, and if you go to the aerial photo, John, you'll see the PDD I-2 there for the West Star facility. And so certainly the one exception is what is fenced in and screened here. The operations yard for West Star is certainly not a C3 type use. It's actually part of a planned development district, and it's I-2 for that area. So as we looked at this, we still go back to the case of 1994, where the Planning Commission, City Commission didn't feel comfortable granting C5 zoning, and the main way that we can characterize the difference is if you have C3 zoned areas like you have on South Ohio, you're not going to see boat sales, you're not going to see used auto lots, things like that, because those aren't permitted in C3, whereas on areas on South Broadway and areas like that that are C5, you will see boat sales and RV sales and car lots and equipment sales and rental. So the one question for you to consider is whether a full C5 zoning is needed or justified, or whether there's another change, a lesser change that could still meet the applicant's needs and be compatible. We are not implicating anything with public utilities or services. Mr. Stack talked to you about the future of Greeley Avenue, and if we look at the comprehensive plan, this is shown as future commercial and retail, and either C3 or C5 or a plan designation with fit. So that brings us to the alternatives that we've identified on page 7 of your report. And alternative 1 is that you could approve a zoning change from PC3 to PC5 and an amendment of the site plan and have no limitations on C5 uses. And if you did that, you'd just be saying that you recommend going from a C3 to a C5, and all that goes with being C5, which would be the whole list of uses that C5 allows. The second option would be to recommend that it be rezoned to Plan C5, but limit it to the same uses it's limited to today, except for adding outdoor equipment sales and rental. And that could be subject to any conditions that you think are appropriate. You could recommend approval of alternate 1 or alternate 2, which would allow the addition of the equipment storage and display area, but you could direct the applicant to relocate or attempt to relocate the storage and display area to a rear or side yard location. In other words, allow the addition of outdoor equipment sales and rental, but have it moved to a different location on the site. You could postpone consideration of this request if you think you need more information from us or more alternatives to make a recommendation, or you could recommend denial of the applicant's request entirely, in which case the addition of the outdoor display area would not be approved. On page 8, if you chose alternative 2, which would allow the addition of equipment sales and rental but no other C5 uses, we've identified 4 conditions there that would be somewhat consistent with what was originally approved in 1994, and that would maintain the C3 sign regulations. It would maintain the integrity of the site plan with the 1 amendment, and it would allow the same uses that are allowed today, only with the addition of equipment sales and rental, but not opening it up to used car sales or other types of C5 uses. So with that, we'd be happy to respond to any questions that you have that relate to the area in general or to the specific proposal. Obviously, Mr. Waters and Mr. Hayworth are here, and they can address specific things about the display area.
Questions for staff? There being none, we'd like to hear from the applicant. And if you would, for the record, please, Mr. Waters, your name and an address for the secretary.
Okay, I'm Jim Waters, 4172 East Magnolia in Salina. I'm president of Waters Realty, who owns the property. I'm also president of Waters, Inc., who operates the property. A lot's changed since 1994. That's almost 20 years ago. Doesn't seem like it, but it is. 20 years ago, when we came into that store, we had a real small rental thing that was, basically renting power tools and things, and nobody really thought very much about it. Well, since then, RSC, who is one of the major players in this, decided to pull out of Salina. And as things change, you move from renting those to renting dingoes, and then all of a sudden we're renting bobcats and excavators, and things, like I said, changed quite a bit during that period of time. When we redid the store, in order to make things convenient for the customers, one of the things that we did, we added steel, which wouldn't be a big thing as far as anything for zoning, but one of the things that required us to do was put in a shop. So the shop was moved to where our old receiving area was, and we now have full, we can do repairs on things. Our entrance into the rental area for the return was moved over onto the side that goes on to Greeley instead of around behind the store, once again for making customers, making it more convenient for customers. And the area that we're proposing is directly next to that area. I think all of you've read the papers and some of the things that sort of have a tendency to disappear around town, called bobcats and things along that line, and we'd kind of like to have this stuff fenced in. Think maybe it might prevent a little bit of theft and some things along that line. We are proposing, along with this, I think there's a thing in your packet, at least there is in mine, showing the structure that, or the green stuff that we were planning on, yeah. Is yours colored?
Have a hedge and that, mine's black and white, but I get the idea, yeah.
Mine's colored. Yeah. And the interesting thing is I don't know how that we managed to do this, but it's got a piece of equipment behind it. So you can kind of see how the screening's almost 100%. And I'm not going to tell you, when you put in landscaping, it looks like that, but this is what it looks like when it gets done. So I think you'd have good screening from the residential area, and it's actually duplexes that are over there. I'm not real sure what else I could tell you. I think it would be a good improvement to the city. I think it would be something our customers, at least I sure hope it's something our customers want, because we're already into it a little bit, and we plan on going into it quite a little bit more.
Is this the photo, Jim? Okay. So the idea is that something like this would be planted along the north side of the fenced-in area.
When it gets fully grown, it's pretty much 100% screening.
So
I
the
guess it's after any questions.
yeah.
Right.
So, Mr. Waters, the reason for the screening would be cosmetic and not necessarily for an advertising value.
It's absolutely cosmetic.
Okay.
If I'm talking about an advertising value, I don't want anything sitting in front of it, so.
I actually like the way it looks now when every time you come by, there's different pieces of equipment out there, and they're sitting on the lawns. Having the fenced, graveled yard doesn't do a lot for me, and I think you answered the question in your presentation that you want the fenced yard for security, and you don't have enough room out back of the building to
If you actually
put it in
look
that
out
fence?
back, things get a little more interesting.
Yeah.
Because there's a trail that goes along there, and it
Right.
actually ends right at our property. And it's interesting because in the middle of the night, we find people behind our building wandering around, wondering where the trail went. So, I mean, it's completely accessible by the river. And, most of those people are just as harmless as they can be and have no bad intent. But it's really not that hard to hotwire a Bobcat. And if you decide you want to do that and drive it right through any fence, you'd have no problem whatsoever. So, we just think it'd be a better place to store this sort of thing.
Jim, question for you. First of all, congratulations. I was in your store the other day. It looked really nice.
Thank you.
So the inside looked really,
I'm kind of excited about it, too.
yeah, it looked great. I also believe there is a need for what you're doing. I agree with Abner. It looks really kind of cool to have those things out there. I don't have a concern about anything over there other than the shrubbery or the greenery growing quicker. And for lack of words, I'm not going to know exactly what this is called, but I have seen chain link fences that have the slats through them. Is that at all possible to do
Sure.
for additional screenage before everything goes up, only to help out the duplexes that are across the street?
You could do that. Actually, in Manhattan, I had that same situation over there, and we were talking about it, and there's some people that think that looks worse than
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know whether it looks worse or better, but
Yes, we don't allow the chain link with slats as permanent screening because it tends not to be permanent. And if you've driven by the West Star yard there, they're forever replacing the slats because they break or are worn out.
yeah.
So it would work as a supplement to the hedge screening, but not as a substitute for it.
Doesn't
Yeah.
West Star have the slatted fence?
Yes, they do.
Well, but if you don't repair it, like you're saying, it looks worse than if you wouldn't have had
Right.
it at all.
If you go by there, it almost looks worse than if it wasn't there. And if we were doing West Star today, we wouldn't have the slatted fence there.
Well, that was actually a question that I had also. Are we anticipating a chain link fence on that north side?
yes.
Okay.
The idea is that you would have a chain link area, and then along the north side, you would have a vegetative screen outside the fence that would help screen that area from Greeley and from the residences to the north.
If I were putting it in without trying to do things to pacify neighbors, what I would do is probably put in a black chain link fence so you can see the stuff you know, the things I've got out there for rent better instead of not seeing them as well. But the suggestion was that we come up with an idea of screening, and went and talked to our landscape division, and they says, if you want to screen it, this will screen it. And as you can see, you don't see through this at all. I mean, it takes a little while for it to grow, but it's not that long. It's pretty fast-growing stuff.
Mr. Waters, will the trees stay?
Will the trees stay? Probably not. You mean
John,
inside
could
that
you go to
fenced-in
one-
area?
It's what we weren't sure about. We knew that this nice bald cypress was going to have to go, but we weren't sure about whether.
I think that one would end up staying. It would not be
Okay.
in that area.
Okay.
Does it go? Okay. Thank you, Bob.
I just have one question. I assume you give some thought to this, but just for the sake of, because of the required setback, which we're also considering, if we allow this, we'd be encroaching on the required setback as it exists. Now, I suppose you give some thought to putting this in front of the store off to the north, what would be the northeast side on the parking, where you have parking now. It's already paved. I'm just asking, and you can stay back of the setback.
Setback is a setback because it's considered a front lawn
I
instead
understand
of a side, which, I don't know if you look at it, but looks like a side to me. But
It does,
Anyway.
but it is still considered a setback.
I
city
do
requirement.
understand that. But like I said, this looks like a side yard to me instead of a front yard. But the problem you run into if you go in front, you destroy the traffic flow through the parking lot. So that's the reason we didn't do that.
We also had some discussions about the summer farmers market and how that impacts.
Which I think is kind of an asset to the
we-
community, that make that
Before this
difficult.
was filed, we did have that discussion, because that was something that staff brought up to say, well, would it be possible to do, say, right in here instead of the front yard area along Greeley? And we kind of walked through the different pros and cons, and we came up with a lot more cons than we did pros. So.
Thank you.
I tend to agree with Commissioner Perney somewhat. I think that, I don't think that's a bad look, and I think if you're going to have equipment rental there, it'd be nice to see that what you did have. And I, for one, I guess the screening wouldn't be as much of a deal to me as if you're going to put a fence, make a nice looking fence, something of the prefab wrought iron type look around there, the black.
That is an item that is at your discretion. The screening, the vegetative screening was proposed at staff's suggestion, but it was with the idea that you'd have a standard chain link or security type fencing, and it is a discretionary item for you. I thought that the screening would make it more palatable potentially to the neighbors or more palatable to the Planning Commission, but that's a judgment call for you.
I agree with that somewhat from the neighbor's standpoint, and certainly we need to be aware of their feelings on that. But to me, the bottom line is we are looking at approving outdoor display of equipment, and for my thought, if we're going to do that, I wouldn't have a problem with it being exposed. And if it was exposed like that, I would think that maybe another location, might be more beneficial from that standpoint. Your company has done a remarkable job on the landscaping of that place. It's always very inviting and attractive, and my wife gets way too many ideas when we go there.
Thank you.
But nonetheless, I wouldn't have a problem with, if you're going to rent equipment, which I rent equipment there too, if you're going to rent equipment there, I wouldn't have a problem with seeing it.
I think the convenience factor, too, what he said was, if I'm understanding, you'd walk straight out the door and be able to, if I was to rent equipment, I could rent it at the back facility, walk out the door, and they could show me how to run it without traipsing through the front of the store, out to the front parking lot, be able to load it in the back, rather than trying to load it out front.
You said that better than I could.
Jim, could you show us on the map over there, now the equipment rental used to be on the south end of that. Now, you say it's on the north end up there now?
I'm not sure how to use this thing, so can I just point?
Absolutely.
rental right now sits right in here. The shop area is right in here. And
That's the loading dock.
this is where you return your rental equipment when you rent something. If you rented a cedar slicer, you would bring it back over here. We built a long fire escape type walkway. And the shop sits right in here. So it's, this is all kind of in the same general area.
So it'd be really handy to have the equipment right there by that entrance.
Yes.
And that's with access from Greeley?
Yes.
Yes.
And then loading, if I may, loading would be, because that type of equipment needs to be loaded on a trailer pulled by a pickup
That's correct.
typically. So you'd load in the back?
Yes.
Is that what you're thinking? Because you don't have room out there to load in that.
Well, the loading would be, you'd come out of the fenced-in lot towards the river.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that area over there. And
Is there room there to load?
That's where you'd load stuff.
Okay.
And it's,
Oh, yeah, there'd be space.
yeah, it's,
Yeah.
if you take the Waters rental, go over there, there's the
Yeah.
area that you're bringing stuff in and returning it.
How high is the fence? 6 foot or 8 foot?
6.
Okay, so it's not very tall. I kind of like Mr. Meixel's suggestion, too, that if you used a fence like the one that's around the water plant on 5th and Mulberry. It's just simple, vertical. I think it's actually made out of aluminum. It might be light steel, but at any rate, it's
like
a simple,
like a bar type fence.
yeah,
We've
simple
actually
bars
got
every
that on
4
the-
inches. Yeah.
We have that on the south side of the building right now.
Right.
That at least on, that would look as good as having the shrubbery and a chain link fence.
Maybe we could save a tree that way.
I don't want to take down that bald cypress. That's a beautiful tree. But it's,
Replant that at my house.
Yeah, I was going to suggest that too.
What's that?
45-degree defense.
Yeah.
I mean, I've grown to be kind of I got a hardware background, but I've got a lot of horticulture in me now, so.
Well, it seems to me that having the kind of fence that has been mentioned, that iron black stuff, as well as some greenery, you could meet the concerns, what I would anticipate would be the concerns of the residents of the houses to the north, as well as have good security and a reasonably handsome-looking fence. You're going to see some of it, no matter where that greenery is, I think. I mean, it would seem to me.
I know staff can answer if there was any concerns, at least when the information was sent out. I don't know.
We
So,
didn't
Jim, does-
receive any contact from any neighbors.
Does option 2 of the staff report, does that do you any good to have it rezoned to Plan C5 but limited to C3 uses? I mean, what is your, out of looking at the staff recommendations for us to choose from, what one of those 5 items do you?
Except for the outdoor storage.
Storage and signage.
I don't have any problems with the other C3 usages as far as the signing, and that's what's all there, and I don't intend to change any of that.
Yeah.
So you're comfortable if we elected number 2 of the staff's recommendations with those conditions applied, you'd be okay with that?
I believe so.
Would you also be comfortable if we mandated an architectural type fence like what we were talking about and leaving one of the trees and planting some shrubbery around there? And I'm doing this solely for our former commission member, Sidney Soderberg, but the look of trees around is sure a nice thing. And I believe Sidney's on the tree board now, is that correct?
I believe you're right.
I'll tell you what, if that's what you'd like me to do, I think we can figure out how to put some trees up there that some people will be happy about. I own a company that does this sort of thing.
You got access to some trees?
I got access to some trees, and I got a company that, if I take Dan Fiorello and say, Dan, design something that looks nice here, not something that's going to fill in the blanks, I think he'd put together something that looks real, real good.
Yeah.
I agree.
That alternative certainly sounds like a palatable one to me.
The one thing where staff and Mr. Waters would need your, and Mr. Hayworth would need your guidance is the concept of whether that includes the 45ing the fence at the corner here to keep this outside the area and preserve this, or whether you would leave that to the discretion of Mr. Waters in terms of substituting something back.
Personally, like I mentioned before, the rest of the property speaks for itself in terms of landscaping, and I know that you can get a sale when they're having a sale there. You can get your trees planted for free, and they guarantee them for 5 years. So, if that involved removing one tree and putting another one at a more opportune place, I'd be okay with that.
Thank you. I'd just personally, if you could kind of, instead of telling me exactly how you want it done, if you could leave it up to our discretion, and you just have to trust me that we'll try to put something back in that looks good.
Yeah, and the way that we have handled that in the past, if this is okay with the other commissioners, we've directed the staff to work with the applicant on a plan that's suitable for both parties.
I think we've worked with the staff numerous times on other things, and I think they've been pleased with our results.
We've worked with Mr. Fiorello on numerous designs.
I don't know if this is a question for you, or as we talked about as a commission. The way I'm reading this, this is going to be a rock, gravel parking
Yes,
area?
That is correct. And it's not a parking area, it's for equipment. It's not.
I understand, but hopefully there'll be quite a little bit of traffic on that in terms of equipment going in, equipment going out.
I would hope so,
And there will be a
yes.
time when we have days and weeks of rain.
Okay.
And I don't mean it, and I wanted to save this until we were doing it as a commission, but we have spent time, meeting after meeting since I've been here, talking about eliminating unpaved parking. And I understand the distinction here, but it's a very fine line.
Yes, it is a very fine distinction, and the distinction that we have is between parking areas where you have customers, employees, and regular traffic, and a fenced-in area, so that if you go over to Bankston Tire Center on North Santa Fe, which is Zone C5, they have paved parking for their employees and customers in the front. In the back, they have an area that's fenced in, that is where they park their vehicles or store their vehicles awaiting repair, rebating parts, or slightly wrecked, and that area is allowed to be surfaced with gravel because it's not a traffic in and out area. It's not part of their parking area. The same we have with contractors' offices where their customer and employee parking is paved, but they have an area in the rear where they store equipment, which is gravel. I'm not saying that either.
I'm just saying
right.
that
yes, it is.
As we look at the big
it's a
plan,
fine
trying
line
to eliminate unpaved
right.
areas.
And it's within the commission's discretion to say it has to be paved and not gravel. But that is the distinction. And it is a fine line.
Dean, I was going to ask the same question. I was going to wait till just a staff question, but I have the same concern of Jerry. We've really worked hard to try to eliminate gravel parking and gravel storage lots, especially in C3 or planned development. And I think it was my understanding that the city wanted to move away from that if they could. This would be setting one more precedence of allowing it, wouldn't it?
The distinction is that all the parking and driving areas on the Earth Care property are paved with concrete. This is what we would refer to as a storage yard for equipment and machinery. And so it could be gravel. That is what is proposed. It is within your prerogative to say that it has to be paved like the other areas.
The loading zone area is paved back behind.
Right. If you go, John, if you want to go back to the aerial photo, all of these areas are paved, even including this area here. So it's not customers and employees and all aren't going to be driving vehicles and parking them and going in and out. There will be equipment moving in and out of there. But what we're saying is that the ordinance requires that all parking, driving, and maneuvering areas be paved. It does not require that storage yards or storage areas be paved, and there are cases where you can go around that a contractor has a storage yard where all his parking and driveways are paved, but his storage yard is not paved. And so it's the same thing with Westar. This area is not all paved, but all the areas, the parking areas out here where customers and employees come and go is paved. So that is a judgment call for you. But the proposal is to have an equipment rental, display, and storage area that is gravel surface, not paved with concrete. That is, again, a judgment call for you.
Had you given some thought to paving it, or you'd prefer not to, I suppose, because of the additional cost would be?
There's a couple things. One's additional cost. But the second thing, things like skid steers and stuff like that, actually you tear up tires the more you spend them on paved stuff than you do on a gravel. I mean, they're really made to work on in dirt. But, I mean, I think probably more of the reason would be cost.
Yeah. Thank you.
Other points on this matter, or more questions for Mr. Waters? Thank you, sir.
Okay.
If there's those from the public, or, Mr. Hayworth would like to address us, thank you. Your name and address for the...
Bob Hayworth, live at 913 Twin Oaks Drive. I'm owner of Lee Hayworth Construction, which is hopefully going to help with the process of this that we've been talking about. Some of the things that I say, then Mr. Waters might want to follow up a little bit from what you've been saying. But in the past, we did look into going with a black chain link fence, iron type fence, and basically no vegetation as a look. And then, like I said, that's when we met with Dean, and he talked about the possibility of maybe doing a solid vegetation on the north side for a buffer for the area. Actually, if you look at the map, on the north side is pretty much the intersection of the streets. There's two intersections of streets and one duplex. The other duplex that's over there is actually, it's almost the backyard or side yard of it where it's already buffered to this property. The duplex actually is in front of the rental receiving area right now. So the cost of as we call it, the iron fence, it's not iron as we know now, but as a similar fence to what's in the south property over there, is substantially more money than going with a chain link fence. I don't know if it would ever be looked at as options with Dean of maybe going with some type of a black chain link fence as an option. Mr. Waters might still decide to go with the similar iron type fence, over there. The other thing is with the buffer area, if the commission we just thought that if we had to do a solid. As far as landscaping wise, if you look around the property, what their landscaper talked to me about, there's lots of sections of landscaping, and there's a pretty area here, there's a division, there's a pretty area here, and they view that as being more architecturally nice than actually building something just solid for 150 feet. So if we did go into a nicer fence situation, I'm saying maybe as discretion with Dean and Mr. Waters' approval here, obviously, is to go with something that's more sporadic, keeping the tree that we spoke of, doing a 45-degree in that area, and doing something maybe with that type of shrubbery, but more as a buffer type area. We're not actually buffering much from across the street. We're buffering an intersection, a side property that already has a buffer, and one duplex that's across the street from the entrance area of the rental. Entrance area of the rental, Mr. Waters said he'd had a lot of problems. That's why he decided to do it to the north, to try to keep public out of the whole back area there. I witnessed it personally when we were under construction at the facility. A gentleman pulled up with a car, loaded up his vehicle. I didn't think anything about it, left. I went inside and started talking about it. I was just thinking, it just looked kind of strange. This guy just pulled up back there and just loaded up a whole bunch of your stuff back there. And they said, really? He had not bought anything. he just literally went in the back and loaded up everything. What this would do is hopefully keep the public away from that back area there, which is all of their storage area per se, and keep it to where the rental area is in the rental area. The rental people could go and just walk, as you said, Todd, just a short distance into that storage area. There could possibly be some customers that would have to back up in there to hook up to the equipment. The whole idea of the rock or rock mixed with gravel is basically getting back to the erosion control, not erosion control, but again, tires with bobcats. A lot of this equipment may come in to where they don't have it cleaned 100%. You know, dirt gets there, or when people bring it, there's dirt. That helps collect that dirt before it goes out onto the concrete. The entrance is right on the north side, closest to the building, so there is a concrete in there area there for quite a while as a buffer. It doesn't open directly to the street. It opens up to their driving area. Security obviously is an important thing. If somebody said come back, said, well, I still think we need to take it away from there, put it in the front, we're right back where we were before. Basically no security. This thing, they could just shut that gate. They know it's 100% rental equipment, and you know that's the people that should be in there, period. If they all of a sudden say, well, why don't they put it in the back, that's opened up to everything they have back there, and I'm guessing things are going to continue happening like what I witnessed that one time. So that's a little bit from me. And I don't know if you have anything to add to that. All right.
Just for purposes of discussion, I think I like the idea that you're talking about, that it would not have to be absolutely solid, that there's some aesthetic value to not being all the way across. I would hope there would be at least 50 or more %. But I still like the idea of the more solid black fence rather than chain link if we can do it, partly because I would hope that that will remain a pedestrian walkway, or at least potentially a pedestrian walkway. And again, even though there's not as much residential traffic right across from it, there still is some. You know, I think aesthetically, and even to fit with the plan that is already existing at Waters, that would be in keeping with it. So I'm finding myself in agreement with part of what you're saying, but I think the expense of the better fence would be worth it.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. If we may hear from the public, please.
Hello, my name is John Blanchard. I live at 1117 State Street. I just have a quick question on the plan, and maybe it's not anything to do with the approval of this thing, but with the bridge. And that is, I know during the conversation of that bridge going in that there was a lot of traffic that came from children over in the areas east of Ohio on the east side. Is there any plan to put a sidewalk in there or any sort of pedestrian path that goes along with that bridge?
Yes. Yeah, it's a good point. Our plan was to put a sidewalk from Ohio to Kenwood Park, basically, and that would be in conjunction with the pedestrian bridge project whenever we can get that done. And that's something we may or may not ask for easements on from
Do you have a
Mr.
preference for which side you're looking at right now?
We looked at the south side, which would be on the Waters True Value side. Based on it seemed like that corner on the northwest corner there, the Wells and Frick properties were a challenge to get by as far as things in the front yard.
Driveways.
Right-of-way. Yeah, I think we just seem to have more right-of-way on the south side for some reason. I don't exactly remember why, but anyway, that was our proposal, and we'd have to avoid some of their landscaping and some other things in that area.
So one of the things that we would want to think about in that regard, John, if you could go back to the aerial photo, is that this gold line right here represents that's the property line, right-of-way line. So the general rule of thumb is the sidewalk would be in this grassy strip between the curb line for Greeley and the property line for Waters True Value. So looking at it from that standpoint, having a fence and not having the thicker hedge that would be out there outside the fence line, that would only become an impediment for pedestrian access up and down there. So actually, the option of trying to make the fence or the fencing more attractive and eliminating that solid hedge, which would only be placed out in the right-of-way, which could interfere with pedestrian access there, makes looking at the having the attractive fence and not having the solid hedge outside the fence a more attractive option if you're looking at it from the standpoint of a future public sidewalk. John, I don't know if you could go back to the Mr. Hayworth's drawing that he submitted that kind of blew up that area. But what we're talking about is if you have a fence line here that's at or near the property line, and then you put the solid hedge in there, then you've got that hedge right up next to or even into the pedestrian path here. So if you're looking at this as a pedestrian corridor, having this screening outside the property line and fence line is probably undesirable. So then you go back and you look at 5th Street next to the water plant, and where you've got a fence line there, and then you've got the sidewalk running along the fence line. That would be more the look that you would have if you dispensed with the screening hedge.
Well, I'm glad that Mr. Blanchard brought that issue, that possibility to our attention, because that certainly would have been lost on, I wouldn't have thought of that. I wondered if we could go back to the previous aerial photo. Is there not also, and Dan, I want to come back to your comment about the feasibility of sidewalk on the north, but am I also seeing a similar line for potential pedestrian walkway on the north side of Greeley? I guess, Dean, I'm asking you, since you were pointing that out. Is there a similar gold line over there?
Yes. What you have with Greeley, with most of our standard streets, you have a 60-foot right-of-way. So from gold line to gold line is 60 feet wide. The street is 33 feet wide, so that you have, in a typical situation, you have about 13 and a half feet between the curb and the property line,
right,
where you would fit a sidewalk in. What Mr. Stack was saying is that over here with the Jeff Wells Agency and over here you've got a lot of driveways and places of, in case here there's 2 stalls of backing in. If you were looking at it from a pedestrian safety and ease of construction standpoint, you're crossing a driveway here, here, and here, but there's more intervals there where it's kind of congested right over here. But it is correct that you could build the twin sidewalk right over here just as well. I think what Dan was saying is that when they looked at it, the ease of construction would be greater on the south side than the north side.
And Dan, could you just elaborate on that, because we're crossing already paved surfaces? Is that the difficulty with the construction?
Yeah, I was actually pulling up the plans right now to look. There's a few more trees in the way and directly in the way. So, the right-of-way line that Dean's talking about is the city property line, and there are more things in the way. Just from the first page I'm looking at, I'll see if the next page here, but there just seem to be more impediments to the south side, or to the north side than the south side. I thought I remembered them being at that corner.
So we have to take out trees in order to do that?
Yeah, you end up having to, there's 3 or 4, yeah, you probably can't see them on there, but there's 3 or 4 just right off the bat, with another one in the road halfway to Ohio, and seem to be just more, and there's less driveways. Is that, I think that's a fair, I'm looking here to count.
Yeah, less driveway space on the south than the north.
Yeah, just more level terrain, maybe. I don't know. That's a good question. We can look at it again, but
Yeah.
it's kind of a balancing act. Every time we put a sidewalk in, we have to pick a side that we feel like has the
Right.
least amount of
Right.
impediments. And 2 years ago, when we looked
Yeah.
at this, that was what we said. But
Well, there would be a real
we'll take
market
look.
for Waters Hardware and for the arbor side. There'd be some more tree planting done, maybe.
Safety-wise, it looks like there'd be less traffic on the north side for kids to walk down the sidewalk. If you're talking about safety, you're going to have more traffic coming in and out of Waters than you are on the north side.
Right.
And the Central State National Bank and that area in there.
Right.
Who pays for
You
that?
have
Is
to
that
take
a
out a few more
capital,
trees.
is that a capital cost improvement?
Yeah, that's
And then
capital.
once it's put in, do they maintain that then
Yep.
later?
Yeah, that is the city, actually, state statutes say that. Whenever you have a sidewalk, you're stuck maintaining it, but it
So,
is a,
but either property owner doesn't have a decision where it goes then. You get to decide what side it goes on, then they have to maintain it.
Yep, and Greeley's a collector or an arterial, like, I think it's, I don't remember exactly.
It's just a collector.
Is it a collector in that area? Okay. So, yeah, that's,
So it could be a burden you're putting on either side of the street, really.
it is, and our thing we're supposed to do is put one on each side, but
Yeah,
We don't-
in the
there's none on
ideal
either.
world, you'd have sidewalks on both sides.
yeah, in the real, a lot of our streets, you're stuck on both sides, but this is just one we have to add, and, I mean, we could put it on both, but it's just pick one or the other that has the least amount of
Yeah.
construction problems, and that's what it goes. I mean, you can tell us to put it on the north side, we could figure out a way to do it on the north, too. You have to cross a street. That's another thing we look at, too. We don't like to cross very many streets, but maybe the driveways take more traffic than the street does. There's a street coming right through there as well.
So we're looking at 10 feet, then if I'm looking at this proposed plan, there's 49 feet, and then, is that 10 feet then from the new proposed fence to the edge of the grass or the curb?
13 and a half, I think.
13 and a half?
13,
That's what Dean was
And a sidewalk's 4 foot,
5.
5?
6, or 8.
So it doesn't leave him much, if we approve that, it doesn't leave him, I mean, I would hate for him to landscape this and we tear it out 2 years.
Right.
To put a sidewalk in.
Yeah, we typically have to avoid landscaping, and it wasn't there when we looked at this. So if it goes in, we'd have to reevaluate, I guess. Typically, they put landscaping on their own property, so if they're putting it in the right-of-way, that's a different story. And I don't know how that works with planning, if that counts, but if that's the way it is, we got to figure out something else.
Well, my thought is that you have a semi-industrial look when you're renting equipment, and not that it's heavy industrial, but aesthetically, I come back to, I think that planning is desirable, and I'd like to see it stay.
How about a nice weedy vine on the fence so that you can't see through it much of the year?
Well, wouldn't you have to remove, as we look at,
Do you sell kudzu?
as we look at the plan that's up there now, Dan, wouldn't those 3 trees have to come out to put a sidewalk down through there?
Yes. No, depends on where you put the sidewalk.
There's already one there. It's hard to see, but
Oh,
there's-
I'm sorry, I do see it now.
It's actually right at the back of curb, so that we're connecting to that, coming through that driveway, and then we're able to get away from the back of curb as we move into that area that you're talking about, right there to the.
But if you stay with the back of the curb, there's room enough for the hedge.
Yeah, there's plenty of room when you're at back of curb, so we try to avoid that, but yeah, that's our other option. We just go back of curb.
This piece right here is when
That's what it's supposed to
anybody
be.
installs a driveway, they're supposed to put a sidewalk section in the driveway. The sidewalk section in this driveway is right here.
Correct.
So if you didn't go over here to curb line, then these would be, and that's why when we, our landscape regulations, and we actually discourage street trees and require businesses as much as possible to put the landscaping on private property, and that's for 2 reasons. One, if you don't have a sidewalk, the trees have to go to get a sidewalk, and 2, you've got a lot of buried utilities sometimes in the right-of-way, and then there's a utility project that comes along, and then the trees have to be removed. So it's in ideal world, the trees would be on the other side of the property line. And in this case, this sidewalk was already here, so those went in there. But the downside to having the fence and then having a planting hedge outside the fence is if the fence is at the property line, then the hedge is going to be in the right-of-way, and it's potentially interfere with pedestrian access. The alternative is that you make them push the fence in 3 feet or whatever, and then you've reduced the display area from 25 foot to a narrower dimension. So then you lose area on that side. But that would be the other option, is that the fence gets pushed in 3 feet to the south, and then the plantings are on private property, not in the right-of-way.
Going back to what Mr. Waters originally said, I think this is something that staff and Mr. Waters' design team could work out, and I'd be comfortable with letting them do that, bringing a plan back. I think if we give you parameters that, which were, say, we want some type of planting there for a landscaping type purpose, whether that be if all the trees have to come out and 3 new ones come in, or if that includes an architectural style fence to go in there, and no screening whatsoever, I'm okay with letting you folks work that out. But if we give you the parameters for that in the motion, I would be okay with you folks working that out.
Have we closed the public session? We'll call this public session closed and bring it back to the commission. I agree with you, Commissioner Mike Sell. For one, I know Mr. Waters wants his property to look good and will make it look good, and I don't think we need to negotiate kinds of shrubbery or fences. But if you guys want to do that, now's the time you may. If you have more discussion, we can certainly have it, but the chair's ready to receive a motion if someone would like to make one.
Well, I've been having my mouth open most of the meeting, so I'll continue with that. Mr. Chairman, I'd make a motion that the Planning Commission approve option number 2, recommending that the property be rezoned to Plan C5 but limited to C3 uses except for the outdoor equipment sales and rentals, subject to any conditions the Commission deems appropriate. Along with that, the motion would include the inclusion of the fence material be an architectural type that was found approved by Mr. Waters and the staff, and that there was sufficient landscaping to meet somewhere near the original plan and with what is currently there.
And staff?
I'm sorry?
And staff's recommendations on the...
Oh, yeah, and the staff recommendations on the 4 items on page 8. The permitted sales be limited to equipment sales and rental. The development of the property be subject to C3 district bulk regulations, signage not to exceed C3, and development, including screening of outdoor storage areas, shall conform. Well, I guess number 4 would be scratched with the
amended with
amended with the prior part of my motion.
I think if they can straighten that out language-wise, I'll second it.
A mouthful. Is there any conversation or more remarks about, you've heard the motion and the second?
If you will, I'm going to vote yes for this with hesitation, and let me tell you why. First of all, I support what they're trying to do. I think it's a grand idea. I think the plan is excellent. I've seen the equipment up there, and I go to Waters all the time. I don't think it's so much about not having paving as so much about wear and tear on equipment. I've driven a Bobcat my whole life. In fact, I owned one for a number of years, and it spent most of its life on hard surface, and it wasn't really hard on the clutches or the tires, either one. But I think we're setting a precedence. My concern is we're setting a precedent. We've talked hard and long about paving and about the requirements of having paving where you're going to have parked vehicles or traffic, either one, and especially in a Plan C3. We've had numerous discussions about this. In fact, we just had a presentation in front of us not long ago, and we asked them to pave an entire lot, and it's going to be out of town almost. So truck terminal. So I'm just concerned we're setting a precedence. Again, I said I'm going to support this, but I want it to be known that I think that this is not the way that cities should go as far as not requiring paving inside the city limits in C3, C4, C5 areas. So that's my comment.
Thank you. Any other comments? All those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Waters, Mr. Hayworth. We'll move on to the next item. Number 4, our application M133, filed by the Salina City Planning Commission to conduct their annual review of the Salina Comprehensive Plan. Staff?
Mr. Chairman, we gave you a little bit of background there on the average. Salina's had a new comprehensive plan or comprehensive plan update about every 10 years. And there was one adopted in 1980, there was one adopted in 1992, and then we had a little longer period there, and our most recent update was adopted in 2010. We've included in your packet there the resolution by which the Planning Commission endorsed and adopted that plan. The primary feature of that is the urban service area, which is designated as the city's urban growth area. And we've got that up on the screen here. So it delineates two things. It delineates future expansion areas. These gold boxes are areas presently outside the city limits that have been identified as candidates for annexation or the next wave of annexations. These are in the northwest quadrant, west of North 9th Street, south of Thomas Park. This is what we refer to as the Beverly Tract, which is at the northeast corner of Ohio and Pacific, presently outside the city limits. This is what we refer to as the donut hole, where it's surrounded by the city, but on West Magnolia, there are parts of it outside the city. We talked about the Yost addition. This is the northwest quadrant of Waterwell and I-135, and then an area to the west of that. Those are all potential future growth or expansion areas. We have a situation where the county does not have its own independent land use plan, but they have adopted this as their plan so that in these areas that are outside the city limits, they have agreed to adopt these same land use patterns, with the purple being employment areas and the yellow being future residential, the lime green being flood-prone conservation type areas. The plan is supposed to be reviewed periodically for its relevance and its application, and so state statutes indicate that at least once a year the Planning Commission should review or reconsider the plan or any part thereof, and you may propose amendments or extensions or additions to the plan. Of course, independent of that, an applicant or a landowner can come forward and propose their own amendments or adjustments. What we pointed out to you is since the plan was adopted in September 2010, the only two modifications that have taken place are we had discussion about the Salina landfill, which was identified as on the future land use plan as being blank on the future land use plan, not on this plan, so this blank was filled in as a public, quasi-public land use. And then we had the discussion in February about the Yost addition, where you recommended and the City Commission concurred with the idea that the Yost addition here was more associated with the purple employment area than with the 9th Street commercial area. And we've reproduced for you our summation of things that were in a separate chapter in the comprehensive plan, which was an implementation matrix, and you can see that what's in there is quite daunting in terms of items that are in there. There's a couple things that I would bring to your attention. We have a new county planner, Mr. David Neal. One of these times we're going to invite him to come to a meeting, allow you to get to know him and meet him. He's moved here from Surprise, Arizona, and he's got his own items where right before he was hired, there was a push to adopt an entirely new development code for Salina County, and that was put on hold, and now it's being reviewed kind of section by section, chapter by chapter, and getting input from the city as well. But he is receptive to formalizing some of the cooperation, the planning cooperation between city and county. At one time, there was discussion about having a joint planning commission as opposed to a city and county planning commission. That has been dropped. What the idea is that, and maybe that idea has some merit, but what is done in Manhattan is Manhattan has like an urban service area planning commission, and that has jurisdiction for the city of Manhattan, and then in the immediate area just outside Manhattan's fringe, and then there's a Riley County Planning Commission that deals only with the very rural areas. And so the advantage of that approach is that if you were dealing with an area like this that just is outside the city limits but is closely related to the city, instead of having an item there go to the county planning commission, you would expand the jurisdiction of this planning commission to also include those fringe areas. That is a concept that we can continue to work with. The other thing is that our current agreements with the county address plating and building permits, but they don't address zoning. So there's a scenario, and it has happened, where the county planning commission approves a zoning change, and then the property's platted, and both the city and county are reviewing the plat, and the city doesn't like the plat, but the county's already changed the zoning, so it's a little late in the game to say, gee, we don't think this should be commercial or residential, so what the concepts discussed is that you would expand that agreement to deal with zoning as well as platting, and then again, if you're on the fringe of the city, this body is looking at it instead of just the plat. So those are some of the items that we'll be working with Mr. Neal in the county. Recently there was a study session with the City Commission where there's been work done on a conceptual master plan for North Salina, and the definition of North Salina is basically north of the tracks, and that may come back to you in the form of a study session here in the future, but there has been some work done in that area. We've been discussing overlay districts and different concepts that would apply strictly to the North Salina area, so there'll be things coming back to you. The Planning Commission previously said that you're not interested in down zoning, so we've identified some areas there where the zoning and land use is one thing, and the plan, the comprehensive plan or land use plan, shows it as something else, and neither the Planning Commission or City Commission was interested in, say, taking South Broadway and downzoning it to residential, making all the uses non-conforming. So that is something you've already addressed. You didn't like the strictness of the conservation area, which allowed for zero development, and you were interested in following the current distinction between floodplain and floodway. And then we have had discussions about making Salina a more bicycle-friendly community, and we are working still towards an overall bicycle pedestrian plan that would also include on-street portions. We're doing pretty good on the trails and the other parts, but we've kind of neglected the on-street bike paths and routes. And then we have a number of things here that would involve potentially code amendments. So the first part was kind of a laundry list, and we've broken it down by downtown, parks, economic development, potential code updates, complete streets. What you see when they're finished there on East Magnolia would fit within the complete streets concept, and the complete streets concept is in the past. I can't speak for Mr. Stack because he wasn't here, but the engineers have focused on moving traffic more efficiently and not focused on the full right-of-way and all the other uses. So we'll let Mr. Stack elaborate a little bit on how the complete streets concept worked on East Magnolia, but basically it is looking at a corridor and not just focusing on street improvements, but also looking at other modes of transport.
Yeah, the discussion earlier was definitely a good one. There was a time in this city when sidewalks just weren't even considered on arterial streets, which is, it's interesting. Almost wild to think about, actually, because there for many years they were on both sides of the streets, set way back from the road, very safe, very open, very easy to walk. Then you've got them on some streets where we kind of had to put them in, and they're right next to the curb. I mean, it's just tough to walk next to Crawford on a 40-mile-an-hour road when you're standing right next to the curb. It's just not good. So it's not surprising that that's finally become a commission directive to figure out a way to get sidewalks, hike and bike trails, think about pedestrian amenities, bus stops, definitely trying to plan in bus stops, as well as medians that make the traveler and the user, it's a nicer looking road. It is, I mean, arguably it's good to be functional. Salina has been very functional. The roads are very wide. They work well for moving traffic, but that was at some sort of a compromise to very little other amenities. I mean, we've got a 60-foot right-of-way or 60-foot road on Ohio, which is a great road, works pretty well, but it's so wide that there's not a lot of room for anything else. So you kind of have to balance the roadway, the medians, turn lanes, bus stops, pedestrian amenities, and it's a heck of a balance when you've only got so much room to work in. But at the point we're at now with this new comprehensive plan, we feel like we have to balance that. Good example is East Magnolia. We didn't have enough room to put in everything we want. So at the time we're building a 3-lane road, 4-lane road in some areas, a 3-lane road where we have turn lanes, medians, and a wider 1-lane road that helps move traffic better, gave us enough room for a hike and bike trail and the sidewalks. And then if the warrants ever exist to widen it or to need another lane, the median actually can function as that. Now, it's not what you'd like, but we have enough room there to make a 4-lane road, just like a Crawford would be, or what is our Magnolia? Basically, Magnolia is 4 lanes. It doesn't have the middle lane like Ohio does, but we could actually put in a 4-lane road on East Magnolia if necessary in 20 years. The projections are in 20 years we may need 4 lanes. The studies now indicate that a 3-lane road with turn lanes works almost as well as a 4-lane road. So if people, I mean, really, if you do travel studies, as long as you can get people out of the way, people traveling at 35 miles an hour can go 35 miles an hour, and you can fit a lot of volume in a 3-lane section. So if you've been to Manhattan lately, they made they call them road diets, but take a road that was super wide and almost beyond really hard to even manage because there's so much pavement and so much width. They take them, they shrink them, they make them pedestrian friendly, bike friendly, and it still moves traffic just as well as it did in the past. So anyway, that's a long answer to your question, Dean, but the shift has come that we try to factor in a lot of different amenities to a road project, and the complete streets concept is that's what's driving that. That's what our comprehensive plan says. That's what all the cities are doing now. So it's looking at the whole travel group, not just the car.
So our point being that there's not a lot of any action that the Planning Commission needs to take to implement that, other than we'd be reporting back to you those improvements. What is important, and Dan would certainly echo that as he looks at things at the bottleneck of Cloud and 9th Street. But ever since I've been a planner, I preach to staff members and to planning commissions, one of the most important functions that you exercise is when you're reviewing plats and subdivisions, because plats and subdivisions is how the city grows, and that's what provides engineering and public works and everybody else the canvas that they have to work with. So when we're looking at plats and we're looking at layouts of things, when we talk about right-of-way dedications and right-of-way widths, that becomes very important, because when Magnolia Road was platted east of Ohio, the very first section, the right-of-way was 60 feet wide, 30 feet either side. As we did Golden Eagle Estates and Eastview Estates and got farther east, the dedicated right-of-way is 100 feet wide, which gives you room to widen a street if you need it, gives you room to have sidewalks that aren't pinched in, gives you room to have paths or those types of things. On 9th Street, between Claflin and Cloud, we have 30 feet of right-of-way from the center line, and our standard for arterial streets is 50 feet. So that means if you want to expand the roadway or have sidewalks or those things, then you're going out talking to property owners about acquiring additional right-of-way or perhaps moving or removing things that are there. So as plats for development come forward, the complete streets concept is important just for you as planning commissioners or anybody else visualizing on this street corridor, are we going to have enough right-of-way to have enough paving width, to have adequate sidewalks and everything behind it, so that we're looking at the whole corridor and all the potential uses and not just a road. So it doesn't require any adoption of anything new. What we did identify at the bottom of page 11 is something that we're working with Dan on, in that right now we have policies, but we don't really have spacing standards for driveways and curb cuts. That something that when we do a staff report or whatever, we can say the standard spacing or the standard spacing in the code from a driveway to an intersection is this, and here's what this plan has. We've been mostly relying on good planning and engineering judgment, but the City Commission has been spending a lot of time on driveway curb cuts and things of that nature, because we have policies, but we don't have any set spacing requirements that commissions can use to evaluate a request. So we're going to work in that direction. And then we did want to point out three things that, on a policy standpoint, were in the previous plan, but not carried over into the, and that's as much for the City Commission as well. But the previous plan had a policy that's clearly stated that annexation will be required before city utilities and services are provided to any site. That may sound like almost a no-brainer, but when the previous plan was repealed and the new plan was adopted, that did not carry over. The other thing is that we had a policy under the previous plan that if you did residential development outside of the primary service area, then you were not eligible to use special assessment financing. So, for example, when Highland Meadows Hamlet went in on East Magnolia, that was considered to be almost leapfrog type development. It wasn't contiguous to the city, and basically under that policy that says, all right, you may do your subdivision, but you are not eligible for special assessment financing. You'll have to finance the infrastructure improvements yourself. That policy was in the previous plan and is not in the current plan. And then there was a policy in the previous plan that was just reinforcing decisions, but it had a policy that said wherever possible, new public buildings and other community facilities should be located within the downtown area to reinforce downtown as a civic center of the community. And that's just as you look at public type facilities, that policy said if you have a public facility or building, it was a look downtown first policy. So we wanted to bring to your attention that those are 3 previous policies that weren't carried over but could be carried over or reinforced. And then we do have Mr. Blanchard here today, and he's been quite active on working with the North Salina Development Group and working towards getting a North Salina master plan. And certainly when that gets fleshed out enough, that would come forward to the Planning Commission, but there'll be some implementation items related to it in terms of overlay districts or other things to do more creatively in North Salina. One of the problems we have in some of our older areas is that we have a lot of places in North Salina where buildings were built with 0 setbacks right on the front property line, and we have current codes and zoning that says anything happens to those buildings, they got to be leveled, and the new building needs to be set back 25 feet, which is kind of it changes the look. It makes for an inconsistent look. So one of the things we've talked about is identifying areas where that's present and perhaps having an overlay district that not only allows but encourages buildings to be set at the property line to kind of achieve that look. And part of one of the things that they're looking in the North Salina plan is making Santa Fe north of downtown more closely tied in and identified with, or an extension of downtown as opposed to treating it as an isolated area. So there's no specific action that needs to be taken on this other than there's a whole lot of stuff in here, and if there were things that planning commissioners felt really strongly about or should be more of a priority than others on this implementation items, this would be the opportunity to let staff know about that. Because this is kind of a work plan, but it's kind of a work plan that is so big it's almost overwhelming, and so you can only bite off things that are manageable but also are priorities. And so we've identified some things that relates to North Salina about bicycle and pedestrian planning and cooperation with Saline County, but if there's other things that are priorities or hot button issues for commissioners on this list, this is your opportunity to say, I wish this was more important, or I wish this could get pushed to the front of the list. So this is your chance. It's like a yearly checkup of the comprehensive plan. So.
Remarks, commissioners, or specific?
I would bring one specifically for residential between the Planning Commission. I'd like to get on the same speed as the City Commission based on a meeting that was on January the 28th, where one of our city commissioners spoke and said that, I hope he was speaking for himself, that he would not support any more residential subdivisions south of town that required special assessments. And I guess what concerns me, and with Mr. Blanchard being here and running for City Commission, which I support what he's doing north of town, is I believe that we need to get on the same page, because as the Planning Commission, we're going to be reviewing those before the City Commission looks at those. I would hate for us to spend a large amount of time promoting Salina and trying to develop the south end and getting more residential going in, knowing that it's going to be vetoed at the city commission level. I believe that Mr. Blanchard and Aaron and Barb and all those have great intentions of North Salina, and I believe that that can work. I'm just concerned that where the city commission is going, and I want to know whether the meeting in there of how that comment makes sense to the planning commission. And so I think that needs to be somewhat addressed between the planning commission and the city commission of getting on the same page. And maybe that can't happen until the new election happens, but my concern is that by that blanket statement, my belief is that Mr. Householder, or Commissioner Householder, needs to understand that you can't get rid of everything in North Salina. Those people who pay $400 a month rent have to live somewhere. We can't just go and bulldoze all that and build new houses down there. And to concentrate only on North Salina without continuing for growth in South Salina would be irresponsible for the Planning Commission as well as the City Commission. So I wanted to bring that to the forefront.
I totally agree with that, and I've said before how important I think it is to have a meeting between the Planning Commission and the City Commission, and to maybe have some agenda items on both sides that we can talk about and see where each other stands. Certainly, things that are important to us, parking surfaces. You know, I mean, if there's not a lot of support for it on the backside, not much, you know, sense in us wasting time with it here. The minimum housing standards, those type of things. You know, I've said it for quite some time, and I've talked to Norm before on this, and I think he's in favor of it. I would just like to see, you know, us have a meeting with them and talk over some of these issues that are very important to us.
Well, and the other thing, and I'll let Mr. Blanchard speak to that, but I see some value as the North Salina master plan that is being worked on gets further refined and all. There was an introduction of that to the City Commission. There were several occasions when the comprehensive plan was up for consideration and adoption that study sessions were held that were joint study sessions where both Planning Commission and City Commission was present for the same study session. And there is some value or merit to that in terms of if we got to a next step or a further study session more in depth with the North Salina Master Plan, I could see some merit to, instead of having the Planning Commission, City Commission having separate study sessions, but that they look at it together at a single study session so there can be some dialogue and exchange on that subject at the same meeting instead of having it at separate meetings. So that is certainly a possibility, even if there weren't simply a joint meeting to have a whole list of those things. But that was one of the things that I wanted to, why I included that on page 13, is that up until the new plan was adopted, it wasn't a policy and it wasn't a discretionary item, but it was actually in an ordinance that said if you do residential development outside the primary service area in an area, or you want to do that, it's not contiguous to the city, you are not eligible for special assessment finance. It's not a judgment call for the City Commission. You're just, Highland Meadows Hamlet didn't not have special assessment financing because the City Commission chose not to. They had adopted by ordinance a policy that said if you do that, you're on your own. That policy is gone. So now the judgment on whether to authorize special assessment financing for any subdivision is simply on a case-by-case basis. There is no policy that differentiates between areas. It's just up to the City Commission when the vote is taken on the advisability and authorization for that. That doesn't mean that there can't be a policy or further refinement of that. It would probably be good to have that discussion before there was any move in any other direction. But right now, there is no policy, there's no ordinance, there's nothing that says that these areas are not eligible for special assessment finance. It's simply done on a case-by-case basis.
If I may, and I don't know where this fits in, but I just don't want it to be remiss and have it left out, and that's we've talked a great deal about gateways and entrances to our community and developing those, and I'm not talking about just signs at gateways. I'm talking about improvement to entrances to our community, and I don't want that to be left out in the newest trend that's coming along in the city. I think that's important to the development of Salina. And so however that fits into this revisiting of the comprehensive plan, I think it's important.
And where we need guidance on that is that when we talk about gateways, there's two things, and there's a line there, and on the public side, which is where Mr. Stack and his group is involved, where you're talking about sidewalks, paths, public landscaping, gateway signage, things of that nature, that's on the public side. If the concern is about gateways on the private side of private development, that's what we need to know, because that's where you get into overlay districts and standards that apply. Right now, the only, it's not really been put to use other than in the one case I cited on North Ohio, where the gentleman wanted to apply to have a flea market, and he said, you can't even apply because our North Ohio Gateway Overlay District prohibits flea markets from even being considered. The only true gateway that we have is North Ohio, which is largely undeveloped, and nothing has really been put forward under that. But there's no gateway overlay district for North 9th. There's not one for West Crawford. There's not one for, so in order to do that, we first need to discuss, when we talk about dressing up gateways, are we focusing on the public infrastructure, which Dan deals with, like wayfinding and making them more attractive in the right-of-way, and then the other side is then we're talking about how development looks and how it's arranged on private property. And if that's the case, then we're looking at identifying overlay districts where we would have some appearance or aesthetic or use limitations or whatever in a gateway.
I vote for A and B both. I mean, I look at Hayes. I mean, let's use Hayes as a model. I think what they've done at that exit off of I-70 on whatever that's Vine or whatever is commendable. It's both private development has shown some initiative to do the right thing, and I think the city through their public development has shown the initiative to make that look attractive. So I think both are important.
Yeah. And again, I'll go back to this. If we're going to spend time to do this here, it'd be really nice to know that on the backside of things that we had support from the city commission.
Right,
Yeah,
but what reason I'm bringing that up is that we had an initiative to move forward with making entrances more attractive through gateway signage and street lighting and street furniture and things of that nature, and the city commission took everything that you recommended and your priorities, and they adopted it, and they took your recommendation and adopted it lock, stock, and barrel. And what I'm hearing is that somehow that didn't happen, but it did happen. Your prioritization for which entryways you thought was more important, they adopted. The design for the entryway signs that you liked the best, they adopted. They chose North 9th Street as the top priority, which was your recommendation. They adopted. So they put funding in the capital improvement program to do it each year. So they took your recommendations that you fleshed out, and they basically adopted every one of them. But it only applies to the public right-of-way portions of those entryways. It doesn't deal with what's happening on private property in terms of how it looks or uses or those types of things.
Can I qualify that a little bit? Because there was a study session on it and the commissioners really focused, they really wanted us to do more on the highways. It was, do you remember that study session? It seemed like they were more focused on I-70 and I-135 at the time. I guess I don't know if they've actually given us the go-ahead for North Ninth. Wasn't that our first one?
Right.
I know.
But what they
put-
did was they created a line item in the capital improvement
Correct.
program to do that, and they agreed that in terms of the entryway signage to, in terms
Yeah.
of the gateways into the city, to take those priorities as listed by the planning
They
commission.
did like that, yeah.
But the planning commission also talked about having signs out on I-70 out towards Simpson Road and Halsted Road to announce that you were arriving at Salina, and the city commission wanted those further explored.
So if I understand you correctly, if we want to address the private side of this, if we want to discuss, say, overlay districts and minimum housing standards or things like that, that we need to initiate those here and then just send them on and see what happens?
What I'm saying is, this is a long list, and when you say that gateways are important to you, we listen to that, but the gateways have two aspects to it, and we've spent all of our time to date talking about the public spaces at gateways. We haven't spent any time talking about what happens on the private side. But if you think having some standards that apply specifically to development and redevelopment on West Crawford as a gateway, you need to tell us that, and then we'll make that a priority.
I think that we've made that
I thought we talked about that.
I-
We're
I-
not being critical. Understand, I'm not bringing it up to be, I'm pleased with what I've seen about signage and improvements to the public side, but I think the other half of that formula is the developmental side, which is going to bring business to our community, and that's really what we want.
I'm not sure how you can dictate to the private sector when the public sector hasn't stepped up. I think, for example, Crawford, when you enter into West Crawford and the Quick Shop is right there, and forgive me if whoever did that, but that little 3 or 4 shrubs sitting over there on the side is not a gateway entry to a town that I want to be associated with. I'm thinking of something that was done out on way south 9th. That's a gateway. I mean, that's something that's as much flack as they take in there. That's a gateway. It looks like I'm entering into something that I'm excited about. Entering into North 9th, which we talked about as being our first gateway that we were interested in cleaning up, and then West Crawford. Again, if I'm a new business coming or an existing one, and you tell me that you're now putting an overlay district on my property, and for me to expand my property or to get a building permit, I have to now do something above and beyond what would have to be done because I'm now in your overlay district, I would say, what are you guys doing? And I would want to see something from the public, the city, before I would have to say to lay in an overlay district on the private sector.
I think it's a chicken and egg situation. I think both are important. I don't know how you get there. I'm not a planner. I don't know how you get there, but they're both important. I don't know which leads the other, but both are critically important. And I go back to, Hayes is as close of an example I can think of. I think they've done some nice things at Vine and I-70. And you look at other communities along I-70, and they haven't done much. So I think we want to be a model for what could happen, and we have them identified. It's just how to get there. I'm not saying we're doing anything wrong. Please understand. I'm just saying I haven't seen much change since we talked about it, other than maybe some city discussion.
Yeah, and what's the next step on that, Dean?
Yeah.
I mean, really, that's the question. Where do we go from here?
Where do we go?
Well, anytime you talk about the term overlay district, and we've talked about that some in terms of looking at North Salina and then in other quarters, you are looking at dropping down requirements that don't apply elsewhere, that are specific to that. So it is exactly as Mr. Welsh described. It says if we have a West Crawford overlay district, what you're saying is if you redevelop or do something on West Crawford, the bar is going to be higher than it would be on a non-gateway area in terms of whether it's more emphasis on front yard landscaping, or putting in missing sidewalk sections, or looking at streetscapes, or even looking at aesthetic standards for buildings.
And is that bad?
It's not bad. It's different, and the test is when the rubber meets the road. I sat in on a whole bunch of focus groups when we had the community art and design, and in the group I was in, which was a very diverse group, they said that they thought their most important thing, which we hear over and over, is improving the appearance of the entryways into Salina. And what they thought was needed was, and the term guidelines was used, which we have guidelines for the downtown area, but design guidelines for new buildings and new developments in those gateway areas. And staff can develop those, and we can, so I said, so what is the answer going to be when somebody has a proposal? We say, here are the design guidelines for this corridor, and they balk at that. Then what is the response going to be from planning commissioners or governing bodies when there's pushback on that? And that's the only time that you'll have the answer. But Mr. Welsh is correct. You would be dropping down on South Santa Fe. We have the same zoning as we have on any other residential street, but we have a historic district overlay. And that historic district has some limitations and restrictions on physical changes you can make to your property that don't apply other places, because it's an overlay, and it's perceived by many that it's more restrictive than which is correct. It is more restrictive. So if you have an overlay district on top of an already commercial district, it's going to be more restrictive than not having an overlay district. As long as everybody understands that, then that's something that you can move forward with. But if you tell us that West Crawford is an important gateway in your mind and you don't like the way it looks today, then we can move forward with something in that direction.
I don't want to short circuit the discussion on gateways, but Todd, I wanted to ask you, if I understood your original comment, was that directed specifically at gateways, or was it just general development to the south and your concern about the commissioner making a statement in opposition generally to that?
Well, yeah, it had nothing to do with gateways. Mine, I'd start out by saying it was a residential only. It was a particular comment of Commissioner Householder, saying, I will not support any other subdivisions, residential, that require special assessments that are going to come in from the south, because he wanted to infill the north.
Right.
And I'm all for the North Master Plan. Don't get me wrong. I believe that we need to be working on both. There also needs to be continue working on south and east development, which is where it's headed, and support the developers however that is to be done, and also support Mr. Blanchard and his team that's out working for north. Don't create this north-south thing. We've had that forever, and we're now starting to get away from that a little bit. But don't tell me, as a person who's working in the south, that you're not going to support that anymore, because you're just drawing a boundary line again, which is what he's trying to break down. Yeah. And I just thought it was, I just didn't like the comment. I felt there was too much support from the other people on the city commission, other than Commissioner Angel, who said that, that was not the whole commission who said that. Yet Angel and Mayor Norm are leaving. Yeah. And the people who are running are proponents of the North Master Plan. So yeah. I just wanted to get that out there, that you take some guys who are out there trying to make this community better, and to blanket that statement as the city commission, I just felt was irresponsible to send that message out to guys who are trying to bring jobs, communities, and housing to Salina.
Well, I want to make two comments. One, just an overall, that may seem a tangential comment and maybe more of an announcement, but I think it's relevant. Kurt Mina, who is Aldo Leopold's biographer, is going to be here at Kansas Wesleyan University for a sustainability seminar then on Monday and Tuesday of next week. On Monday at 7 o'clock in Fitzpatrick Auditorium, he'll present the movie Green Fire, which is based on Aldo Leopold's life. So it's an autobiographical, it's a biographical film, but also about application of a land use ethic, as Leopold saw it. And then Mina will talk on Tuesday, 7 o'clock. And there'll be a panel after that talking about wise land use, how we preserve wildlife, preserve the land itself for the good of everybody, I mean, the population. So I would recommend to the commission that it's a really good thing to go to and ask your friends to go to, and maybe even raise issues like this as a matter of public discussion. So that's point A of the announcement. Point B is, you know, I don't know that I'm not going to speak for Commissioner Householder. I don't know exactly what he meant at that point in time. But I do know that I've heard him and others make the observation that we have hundreds of thousands of dollars, and maybe much more than that, in investment, city investment already in existing, and we're not talking just about far north Salina, we're talking about all the way down to kind of a boundary. And the point being that it's wise for the city to use that to make sure that that gets developed, that there are houses there, before we start asking city funds to be expended further south. And then there's the whole issue of sprawl. Where does that go? And, you know, so I can't, you know, I don't know that there are any perfect answers. I understand what you're saying is we need to be open to these situations as we discuss here are very fluid, and we need to look at specific examples. But Dean's where the rubber meets the road comment is instructive too, because I think a couple of my colleagues here were just commenting, well, we just sort of violated a principle that we had talked about in principle by not asking for paving. Now, I confess I was a little bit torn about that, too. Had an amendment been made, offered, would it have been carried by the commission? I don't know. So I think it's good for us as a commission to discuss what we are in principle and then how that principle gets applied. But I've found that the people on this commission are pretty open, pretty, you know, it's a pleasure to work with you guys. I know, by the way, it is guys, but nonetheless.
I think we need to have a joint session with the planning, with the city commission, and discuss the whole aspect of special assessment as an incentive to new development. The danger that most people don't, well, there's a couple things I don't like about special assessments in general. One is that frequently when people get ready to sell a house or sell a property, they try to ignore the existence of the special assessment and that additional cost to the buyer, and occasionally that comes back to bite buyers. It troubles me when I've looked at property. Normally, a real estate agent will not tell you whether there are special assessments there unless you ask. And they're so high on some lots, it's a significant proportion of the potential purchase, and frequently buyers don't find out about it until the very last minute when they've finally figured out their financing and find out what their total payments are going to be. So that's kind of a deceitful aspect of special assessments that have bothered me personally in the past and things that I've done over the years. The other thing is that special assessments are an obligation of the city should the developer or the properties affected by them default. So they are a secondary debt of the city, and if things go wrong, as they have been known to do in recent years, and the property quits selling, the special assessment's debt does not go away. It becomes more and more an obligation of the entire city. And I think I may be one of the people guilty of talking to Commissioner Householder, but I've talked to the other commissioners too, about this problem that you can get so much an assessment out there that if development stops for any reason, that you get into a tax bind where the city itself will have to start paying those assessments. And I know people will look aside and say that doesn't happen, but it has happened, and it has happened in Salina. In the 60s, streets were paved in North Salina by special assessment because they were dirt streets and they had never been paved. Well, what happened was a great many of those property owners could not afford to pay that special assessment. They defaulted on them. That means the city had to pay the specials in full, and eventually the properties came to tax sales, and some of that is still happening. But in the 80s, there were properties up there that had several $100s or several $1,000s of assessments against them that sold at tax sale for $10 a lot. I saw that could happen again if you get too much in pre-developed property with special assessments on it. And that's one of the ways to look that the city could look at through their financial department, is possibly put a total gross debt limit out there, and then you really have to start prioritizing, okay, we're only going to have a limited amount of debt remaining available to us, or new debt that we want to take on, so let's prioritize where we're going to spend it. And that's when you could get into saying, okay, we don't need to be carrying financing on high-dollar housing. Let the high-dollar people pay their own development costs on the front end, financed by the developer, so that everybody involved knows what they're paying for, and it's incorporated in the house on the front end, or the whatever the development is. Colorado, I spend 25% of my time in Colorado in recent years, and have a lot in past years. I don't know whether it's statewide ban on it, but I know a lot of communities in Colorado have just quit doing special assessment development entirely because of that debt obligation to the community, and because, of course, they have the draw of the mountains, so they
have
say,
Pulte homes
pay
and
the price
people
of
who
the
will
front
pay
end.
that.
Pardon?
It's because they have Pulte homes and people who have millions of dollars. You have to remember, we live in Salina,
have the
Kansas.
market pressure,
You're
the
not going to
market to buy.
You're not going to have those guys come in and do it. And again, not a time for this, and Mike's the deputy city manager and I have had a discussion on this. He's even called Junction City. And when a developer has to put up, if they were to default on it, the bank's either going to take it back and they're going to be responsible. If they don't owe anything on it, the bank is not going to let that go back. If they don't owe anything on it, and it does go in there, you have a 35% irrevocable line of credit that reduces that debt. If you took those to sheriff's sale or tax sale, there's not anybody who isn't going to buy those lots for $10,000 if they're selling for $40,000 with $30,000 in specials. I mean, your liability is very little to have a blanket statement to say we should not do that as a community. You might as well just pack up the streets and end it at Dimaroo and end it at Presbyterian Manor and say we're done. There's not going to be anybody who's going to be able to afford to step up and spend millions of dollars at selling 3 to 5 homes per month in a subdivision to be able to support that. So to blanket that statement and say that, it's not a, I would love to have a study session with yourself and City Commission to talk about that. I just don't believe it's true to be able to say that statement, for it to send out to the other people in the community that says, we are not going to support special assessments. I feel very strongly about that.
How many are we supporting now? That's what's unknown to most people.
The only offensive thing I say is that you have picked the wrong real estate agents. When you say that they don't tell you about special assessments, because I don't believe that's a fact. I think the people in this community do a good job of telling the public. They just don't pay attention. Sorry, Abner.
On a
Okay.
completely
Well, sorry
different
for
note, if you
Lumping
guys
all
are
the
done,
realtors together, real estate agents.
I'd like to comment on the complete streets portion of that. Saturday morning after our record snowstorm, my wife and I tried to find a place to run in the city, and the streets were all, the sidewalks were all pretty much snow-packed. We went down to Target, and we parked there, and I said, hey, look, there's clean sidewalk. Let's go up that way. So we ran up to Ohio, and we ran out Ohio. The sidewalks were all cleared off. I don't know who does that, if the city or...
Parks.
Okay. They did a great job. The width of those things, that was the other thing we noticed. There was a lot of people using them, and there was traffic going both directions, bicycle and runners and walkers. And are those 6 foot or 8 foot wide?
10.
Well, it's 10 on Schilling, Ohio, Magnolia, and 9th.
Okay.
It's a 10-foot wide sidewalk, actually.
That was really nice.
Very nice.
A lot of it handled a lot of traffic, and it was really nice in that bad weather to be able to get out and get a little exercise in. So anyway. Dean, last note, on those 3 items there that are policies, do you think that those need immediate attention? Is that something we need to get right after, or
Well, we just wanted to bring it to your attention. A lot of it is for internal staff attention as well. I think everybody believes that it's still there, but it actually, what it needs to be done is it needs to be reinserted into the plan. And if we simply had something from the Planning Commission that says, we think annexation and utilities, we think special assessment financing, and we think the location of public buildings is something that needs to be specifically addressed in the plan, then we would work in that direction to get them pulled back in. I mean, it's not that the plan doesn't mention them, it's just that the previous plan was adopted by ordinance, and those were specific policies that were adopted, and when that ordinance got repealed in this new one, basically those were lost, and we're saying these could be reinserted. I think the special assessment thing is, it's a lot bigger issue than simply, but having a policy that relates to special assessments, the comprehensive plan is the place to have it and to address it. And right now, there is no policy on special assessments other than your petitions put in front of the city commission, and they'll decide whether to approve it or not. That's the policy.
We can take this back to city manager just to see, there was a time in the, well, in 89-4066 is the last resolution that we have on development. It was done by a task force of people just like you and just like the commissioners and developers, and Mr. Hayworth was one of them. Actually, he was on the committee. So it was a committee of people who were interested in it, and they had to get in a room and figure it out. So it'd be everybody from Todd's background to Abner's background. I mean, you figure out what's the compromise, what's the solution, what's the settlement, what's it going to be, how do we encourage development in already existing areas and allow or also get other housing built. And I mean, they came up with a policy, but it's been a while. It probably could be used to look at it again.
This was specifically dealing with sprawl or leapfrog development that basically said, if you want to do sprawl or leapfrog development, you're on your own. The city is not going to assist that with special assessment financing. That policy is gone, and it.
You can bring that one back pretty easy.
That could be brought back.
Yeah, that one could be brought back pretty easy. The assessment.
Yes, the other one about dealing with non-sprawl, non-leapfrog development is that's a far bigger issue.
That's an elephant that hasn't been dealt with since 1989. So it's people have talked about it. It just hasn't been dealt with, and nobody's proposed a solution that everybody's okay with yet. And maybe it can't be done. I don't know, but it's tough.
The other part of resisting sprawl and redevelopment is the whole concept, and you had in those 65 points, there's several points that speak to having more mixed use and more flexible zoning categories where, if Water's True Value were building a new store, they could build a store that had housing on the second floor. They could apply for or change the whole setback setup. Instead of a traditional set the store in the back of the parking in front, they could set the store on the street and have the parking in the back, that sort of thing, which we just need more flexibility and more mixed-use kind of thinking in the redevelopment areas where there are going to be other problems, lots of problems of constrained sites, of not being able to acquire all the property you might like to have, and putting things together. There's a lot of potential, especially along Broadway, some of West Crawford, some of these areas that are mentioned in the report today about where there's a conflict between the possible over the comprehensive plan use and the present land use, and some of those things could be addressed by a more imaginative mixed-use form of redevelopment. There's one thing in the comprehensive plan that has really bugged me, and I'm sorry that I didn't attend enough sessions to know why it got in there, but that whole Halstead Road access, that's the only access there is now, that whole commercial area shown out there northwest of town, northwest of the conservation area, the floodplain areas, I think is a really poor idea. If there's demand for more commercial that's not really attached to town, because it would not be attached to our town, I think it'd be better to be clear out at Glendale, 8 or 9 or 10 miles west of town. Start a new town out there.
Well, I think that the way that was sold to us was that if we got the mega project, the casino or the speedway or something.
There's strings attached to that, the area of special opportunity, but if that was the next NASCAR racetrack or a casino or something like that, that was a play. But for a grocery store, no. For truck stop, no. But if it was something unique and of regional impact, because obviously the biggest impediment here is there's absolutely no utilities and no good way to get them there, and you certainly wouldn't invest in utilities in that area unless you had something that had a super impact.
And the special assessments would be astronomical.
Yeah, and the thinking was that you needed to have some kind of carrot out there for somebody if they did want to bring something like that, and we could say, yes, we've talked about that, and this is where we're going to put you.
So I guess if we display this map in the future, we'll have to put a special label right there and say this is not a conventional commercial area.
So
Yes.
just a big not likely on it.
Yeah.
Using special circumstances.
Okay.
Well, I hope not to ramble, but that's why we have planning commissions and city commissions to make decisions like that, because you've got so many potential concerns no matter where you go. It was instructive to me, the whole issue of Old Dominion truck lines and the value of interstate off-ramps. Okay, so you've got a whole different set of financial, economic considerations there than you do in unbuilt over agricultural land, which is fairly scarce. Then you've got the issue of floodplain and what's already built out to. I mean, there are so many complexities in that, but it does help to have some idea about where we stand as a city and as a commission on how we want development to proceed. It's a good guide. And the comment was made about land being more scarce in Colorado, and that's accurate. We can expand a lot further here, but still, land is land, and they're not making more of it, as my real estate my father-in-law used to say.
Gentlemen, I appreciate all your comments. As I understand, we don't need to take any action on
No,
it.
this is your opportunity to weigh in on any development policy or lack of policy or direction that it should go, and all of your comments will be duly noted in the minutes.
I appreciate the open discussion because it helps everybody understand each other's mind
And-
group our point
And
of view. So.
somewhat related to that, we noted the importance of the March 19th meeting. We have, it's a little unusual request, but the owners and developers of the Foxborough mini storage have, at least it's the first successful attempt that I have experienced, is the rail line north of Schilling Road between there and butting the back of their property. They have gotten title to that from the railroad, but it is rail right-of-way, and they want to convert it into a developable strip of land, so it's not zoned because it's railroad right-of-way, and it's not platted because it's railroad right-of-way, and so they're bringing forward a request for that. We are having our what we've done along North Ohio where the overpass is we bought more right-of-way than what was needed just for that project, so we're coming back with a cleanup replat of the Ohio-York area, and we've had interest in parties acquiring what we could characterize as surplus right-of-way there, but in order to do that, you got to identify what's surplus and what's right-of-way, so we have a cleanup plat for Ohio and York. We have an application for final site plan approval for a Taco Bell north half, Starbucks restaurant south half, south of IHOP at Central Mall. That will be a site plan coming to you, and we have a couple of conditional use permits And then following up on that, on March the 8th, we're expecting an application that Mr. Story knows all about, is for, since 1995, Quick Shop has been working on acquiring additional property next to their site on West Crawford to grow closer towards the attractive landscaped area that Mr. Welsh pointed out, but to basically scrape the site clean and redevelop a brand-new Quick Shop in that location, incorporating some. What happened was Centennial Road was shifted to the west. That created some surplus right-of-way there. Quick Shop has obtained that now. They would come back and replat that into a reconfigured lot and come back with a site plan for a new Quick Shop, which will be in the West Crawford Gateway coming off the interstate, and you will get to review that plan and decide if it's up to your standards. The good news for Mr. Welsh is that the little congregation of pine trees is actually in the area that they want to develop, so those will be relocated out of there. But we're saving enough right away that we'll have area there for an attractive gateway sign. But again, when that comes before you in April, you will get to look at the public side and the private side and a gateway entrance. But that's the type of thing that we're talking about, is that's a gateway location, it's a redevelopment, and it's a plan that's going to come before you for your review so you can decide if it's up to gateway standards. So we'll promise you interesting agendas, at least for the upcoming months.
Dean, are we having a meeting? 2 weeks? You have enough?
Yes. You don't get spring break, just your kids.
All right. I'm going to call it adjourned.
Crystal can have spring break.
Walking, I realize Abu Ahmed is dressed like he just walked out of a gun